Poor single mom inherits billionaire's fortune. His violent son hunts her family until love saves them. The bullet shattered the coffee shop window inches from Mia's face. Her 9-year-old daughter screamed as glass exploded around them. "Get down!" Jackson Brennan roared, his massive frame shielding them both as he returned fire. 3 days ago, Mia was scraping by as a hospital orderly. Now she'd inherited $50 million, and Tony Castillo would kill her and Layla before he'd let some nobody steal his father's fortune. But would her bodyguard die protecting them first? 3 days earlier, Mia Sullivan wiped down the last bedside table in room 314, her shoulders aching from another 16-hour shift at Metropolitan Hospital. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows under her eyes that spoke of too many nights surviving on coffee and determination. Her scrubs, carefully mended at the seams, still carried the faint scent of antiseptic and hope. "Miss Sullivan?" The voice belonged to Dr. Williams, the head of internal medicine. "You've got a visitor at the nurse's station." Mia's stomach dropped. Visitors usually meant trouble, either Layla's school calling about missed payments or another overdue bill collector. She smoothed her hair back into its practical ponytail and walked toward the front desk, her sneakers silent on the polished floor. A woman in an expensive charcoal suit stood waiting, her silver hair pulled into an elegant bun. Everything about her screamed money, from her leather briefcase to the way she held herself with quiet authority. Mia had learned to recognize wealth during her years of cleaning hospital rooms, watching how some visitors commanded space while others, like herself, tried to take up as little as possible. "Mia Sullivan," the woman extended a manicured hand. "I'm Amelia Hart, attorney at Hart & Associates. I need to speak with you about Harrison Castillo." The name hit Mia like a physical blow. Harrison Castillo, the elderly billionaire she'd cared for during his final weeks in the hospital. She'd cleaned his room, adjusted his pillows, and listened when he spoke about his regrets. Nothing more than professional kindness, the same she showed every patient. "If this is about his final days, I assure you, everything was done according to protocol," Mia said carefully. "I followed all hospital procedures." Amelia's expression softened. "Miss Sullivan, you're not in trouble." "Quite the opposite. Mr. Castillo has left you something in his will. We need to discuss the details privately. Would you be available tomorrow morning?" Mia stared at the business card Amelia pressed into her palm. The address was in the financial district, worlds away from her cramped apartment and Layla's overcrowded public school. "I work tomorrow morning." "This concerns $50 million, Miss Sullivan. I think your supervisor will understand if you take a personal day." The words seemed to echo in the sterile hospital corridor. $50 million. It had to be a mistake, some clerical error that would be corrected once lawyers realized they'd contacted the wrong person. People like Mia didn't inherit fortunes. They worked double shifts and chose between groceries and school supplies. But as she stood in Amelia Hart's law office the next morning, surrounded by mahogany furniture and law books that probably cost more than Mia's annual salary, the impossible became reality. "Harrison Castillo was very specific in his instructions," Amelia explained, sliding documents across the polished conference table. "He was impressed by your kindness during his hospitalization. He mentioned watching you spend your break time reading to an elderly patient who had no visitors, bringing extra blankets to children in the pediatric ward on your own time." Mia's hands trembled as she read the legal documents. The numbers seemed surreal. $50 million, plus ownership of several properties and business interests. "But I barely spoke to him. I just treated him like a human being." "Apparently that meant more to him than you realized." Amelia's voice carried genuine warmth. "However, there's a complication. Harrison's son, Tony, is contesting the will. He's claiming his father was mentally incompetent when he made these changes." "Maybe he's right," Mia whispered. "Maybe Mr. Castillo was confused." This doesn't make sense. Harrison was completely lucid when he contacted me 6 months ago. He'd been watching you for weeks, asking staff about your character. This inheritance isn't random kindness, Miss Sullivan. It's recognition of who you are. Before Mia could process those words fully, the office door opened. The man who entered changed the entire atmosphere of the room, his presence both commanding and protective. Tall and powerfully built, he moved with the controlled precision of someone accustomed to danger. His dark hair was military short, and his alert gray eyes immediately scanned the room, cataloging exits and potential threats. "Miss Sullivan, this is Jackson Brennan," Amelia said. "Given Tony Castillo's threats, I've taken the liberty of arranging protection for you." Jackson stepped forward, and Mia caught the faint scent of cedar and something indefinably masculine. His handshake was firm but gentle, calloused fingers telling stories of work that went far beyond boardrooms and legal offices. "You don't look like someone who needs protecting," he observed, his voice carrying a slight rasp that suggested he'd seen more combat than conference rooms. The comment sparked something defiant in Mia's chest. "You don't look like someone who'd die for a stranger." Their eyes met and held, an unexpected jolt of awareness passing between them. Jackson's gaze took in her practical clothes, the way she held herself with dignity despite circumstances that had clearly been difficult. Mia found herself studying the small scar above his left eyebrow, the way his presence seemed to fill the spacious office. "I wouldn't be here if I didn't take that responsibility seriously," he said quietly. Amelia cleared her throat. "The threats against you are very real, Miss Sullivan. Tony Castillo has significant resources and a violent history. 3 months ago, he was arrested for assaulting a business partner who crossed him. The charges were dropped when witnesses suddenly refused to testify." Mia's world tilted. 24 hours ago, her biggest worry had been whether she could afford Layla's class field trip. Now she was discussing death threats and bodyguards like something from a movie. "I need to think about this," she said, standing abruptly. The sudden movement made her sway slightly. She'd skipped breakfast to make this appointment on time, another small economy she was used to making. Jackson was beside her instantly, his strong hands steadying her arms. The contact sent warmth racing through her body, and she found herself looking up into eyes that seemed to see too much. For a moment, the professional distance between bodyguard and client disappeared entirely. "When did you last eat?" he asked, his voice gentler than she'd expected. "I'm fine," she said automatically, then immediately felt foolish. The man was obviously trained to notice details, and her empty stomach was probably written all over her face. "There's a cafe downstairs," Amelia suggested. "Why don't you two discuss the practical arrangements while I prepare the paperwork?" As they rode the elevator down in silence, Mia snuck glances at Jackson's profile. He radiated the kind of quiet competence that probably made dangerous people think twice, but something in his expression suggested depths beyond the professional bodyguard facade. The cafe was nearly empty at mid-morning, allowing them to claim a corner table with clear views of all entrances, a choice Mia noticed Jackson make automatically. He ordered coffee black. She asked for tea and a muffin, suddenly self-conscious about her practical food choices. "Tell me about your daughter," he said once they were seated. The question surprised her. Most people in his position would start with security protocols or threat assessments. "Layla's 9. She's smart, funny, and completely unaware that her mom sometimes lies awake at night wondering how we'll pay next month's rent." "And her father?" Mia's expression hardened. "Not in the picture. Never has been. Never will be." Jackson nodded, filing the information without judgment. "Where does she go after school?" "Aftercare program until 6, then she does homework while I study for my nursing degree online." The words painted a picture of carefully managed schedules and no room for error. "You're in nursing school?" "Second year, It's taking longer than I'd like, but she shrugged, unwilling to detail the financial constraints that made full-time education impossible. Harrison Castillo chose well, Jackson said quietly. Not many. People would work double shifts and still find time for school. Something in his tone made her look at him more carefully. What about you? How does someone become a professional bodyguard? Military first. Special forces. When I got out, private security seemed like a natural fit. Do you have family? The question seemed to hit something vulnerable in his expression. Not anymore. The simple answer carried weight that Mia recognized, the kind of loss that shaped a person's entire worldview. She found herself wanting to ask more, but her phone rang before she could speak. Miss Sullivan. This is Tara from Layla's school. There's been an incident. Mia's blood turned to ice. What kind of incident? A man came to the office asking questions about Layla, which classes she's in, what time she's usually picked up. When we asked for identification, he became belligerent and left. We've called the police, but I wanted you to know immediately. Jackson was already standing, reading Mia's expression with practiced ease. She ended the call and looked up at him, fear crystallizing into cold reality. They're already targeting my daughter. We go get her now, he said, his voice carrying absolute authority. No discussion. As they hurried toward his truck, a black vehicle with windows tinted dark enough to suggest bulletproofing, Mia felt her world shift again. The inheritance wasn't just changing her life, it was threatening the only thing that truly mattered to her. I can't put Layla in danger, she said as Jackson started the engine. Maybe I should just walk away from all of this. He turned to look at her, his gray eyes intense. Walking away won't make Tony Castillo forget you exist. He sees you as a threat whether you take the money or not. The truth of his words settled over her like a cold weight. There was no going back to her simple life of double shifts and careful budgeting. Harrison Castillo's kindness had thrust her into a world where money and violence intersected in ways she'd never imagined. So what do? You let me protect you and Layla while Amelia fights the legal battle, and you trust that sometimes good things happen to people who deserve them. His words carried conviction that made her want to believe him. But as they drove toward Layla's school, Mia couldn't shake the feeling that accepting $50 million might cost her everything that really mattered. The school parking lot seemed ordinary enough. Other parents picking up children, teachers heading to their cars with arms full of papers to grade. But Jackson's posture remained alert as they walked toward the main office, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. Remember, he said quietly, we're going to get Layla and go somewhere safe. Don't let her think this is an adventure. Kids need to understand when situations are serious. Mia nodded, trying to calm her racing heart as they approached the school entrance. Through the glass doors, she could see Layla sitting in the main office, swinging her legs and reading a book with the intense concentration she brought to everything. The sight of her daughter, safe, unaware, completely trusting that her mother would handle whatever was wrong, strengthened Mia's resolve. Harrison Castillo had seen something in her worth $50 million. Maybe it was time she started seeing it too. But first, she had to keep Layla safe. Everything else could wait. Have you ever had your entire world turned upside down in a single day, going from struggling to survive to inheriting a fortune that comes with deadly strings attached? Tell me how you'd handle this impossible situation in the comments. Let me know where you're watching from. And hit subscribe if you're already invested in Mia and Jackson's dangerous journey. The drive to the safe house took them through neighborhoods Mia had only seen from bus windows, tree-lined streets where houses sat behind iron gates and manicured lawns. Layla pressed her nose to the window, fascinated by the sudden change in scenery. Mom, why did I have to leave school early? And who's the serious man driving? Mia exchanged a glance with Jackson in the rearview mirror. They'd agreed to tell Layla enough truth to ensure cooperation without terrifying her. "This is Jackson, sweetie. He's a friend who's going to help us with something important. We might be staying somewhere different for a few days." "Like a vacation?" Layla's eyes lit up with 9-year-old optimism. "Not exactly," Mia said gently. "More like keeping safe while some grown-up problems get sorted out." Layla accepted this with the resilience that had gotten her through years of her mother's unpredictable work schedules and financial stress. She returned to her book, apparently satisfied that whatever was happening, her mother had it under control. The safe house turned out to be a modest ranch home in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Nothing about it screamed wealth or security, which Mia realized was probably the point. Jackson ushered them inside quickly, his professional manner returning as he began checking windows and door locks. "The refrigerator's stocked," he told Mia. "Landline phone works, but don't use your cell unless it's an emergency. I'll be staying in the guest room to monitor the situation. You're staying here." The prospect of sharing close quarters with the enigmatic bodyguard sent an unexpected flutter through Mia's chest. 24-hour protection means 24 hours, he confirmed. "I know it's an adjustment, but Tony Castillo isn't the kind of man who makes idle threats." As if summoned by his words, the landline rang. Jackson answered with a curt, "Brennan," then his expression darkened. "When?" he asked. "How many of them?" A pause. "We'll be ready." He hung up and turned to Mia, his face grim. "That was Derek, my partner. 3 men just left Tony Castillo's office building, armed and heading in this direction. We need to move." "But we just got here," Layla protested, looking up from where she'd been arranging her homework on the kitchen table. "Family emergency," Mia said quickly, her pulse racing. "We need to go with Jackson right now." The next few minutes blurred together in a rush of gathering belongings and following Jackson's crisp instructions. He moved with military efficiency, checking sight lines and escape routes while hustling them toward the back door. They'd barely reached his truck when the sound of shattering glass echoed from the front of the house. Layla grabbed Mia's hand, her earlier excitement replaced by fear that tightened Mia's throat. "Stay low," Jackson commanded, starting the engine as the first gunshot split the afternoon air. As they sped away from the safe house, Mia realized there was no going back to her old life. The man beside her had just saved their lives, and somewhere in the chaos of the last few hours, she'd begun trusting him with everything that mattered. But trust was dangerous when it came with feelings she couldn't afford to have. Jackson Brennan was her protector, not a potential partner. Getting those roles confused could cost all of them more than just money. The question was whether her heart would listen to her head when survival depended on keeping emotions out of the equation. Chapter 2. The second safe house was a cabin nestled in the mountains 40 minutes from the city. As they climbed the winding road, Mia watched Jackson's hands on the steering wheel, strong, capable hands that had just guided them away from danger with steady precision. She found herself wondering what those hands had seen, what they'd done in darker moments than this one. "Are we going camping?" Layla asked from the back seat, her resilience returning as the immediate threat faded. "Something like that," Jackson answered, glancing at her in the rearview mirror. "Do you like s'mores?" "I've never had them," Layla admitted. "Mom doesn't usually have time for camping." Mia felt the familiar stab of guilt that came with every reminder of experiences she couldn't provide for her daughter. Working double shifts meant sacrificing the kind of memories other families took for granted. "Well, that's about to change," Jackson said simply. "This place has everything we need for a proper s'mores experience." The cabin was rustic but comfortable, with a stone fireplace dominating the main room and windows that offered panoramic views of the forested mountains. It felt like a world away from the sterile hospital corridors and cramped apartment that defined Mia's normal life. "2 bedrooms upstairs, 1 down here," Jackson explained as he carried their bags inside. "I'll take the downstairs room so I can monitor the entrances." "This is like a movie," Layla breathed, running to explore the loft area above the main room. Mia followed Jackson as he began his security check, watching him test window locks and examine sight lines with professional thoroughness. "You do this often? Protect people in mountain cabins?" "Sometimes the best security is distance from the threat," he replied, adjusting curtains to limit outside visibility. "Tony Castillo has resources, but he also has ego. He'll assume you've fled the state, not hidden 40 minutes away." "And if he doesn't assume that?" Jackson turned to face her, and something in his expression made her pulse quicken. "Then I keep you and Layla safe until Amelia can end this legally." The quiet conviction in his voice wrapped around her like a promise. Standing close to him in the cabin's intimate lighting, Mia became acutely aware of how the day's crisis had stripped away the polite distance between them. He wasn't just her bodyguard anymore. He was the man who'd put himself between her family and violence without hesitation. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why risk your life for people you barely know?" For a moment, something vulnerable flickered across his features. "Because everyone deserves someone willing to stand between them and the worst the world has to offer." The words carried more weight than a simple professional philosophy. Mia found herself stepping closer, drawn by the pain she sensed beneath his controlled exterior. "What happened to you?" she whispered. Before he could answer, Layla's voice called down from the loft. "Mom!" "There's a puzzle up here with 1,000 pieces." The moment shattered, leaving Mia feeling exposed and Jackson retreating behind his professional mask. "I'll start dinner," he said, moving toward the kitchen with that same controlled precision. The evening took on an unexpectedly domestic quality. Jackson proved surprisingly adept at cooking, preparing grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup, while Layla chattered about her day. Mia found herself watching the interplay between her daughter and this unexpected protector, noting how naturally he adjusted his communication style for a 9-year-old audience. "Jackson used to be a soldier," Layla announced during dinner, apparently having extracted this information during their cooking collaboration. "Is that right?" Mia glanced at him across the rustic dining table. "Long time ago," he confirmed. "Different life." "Were you scared?" Layla asked with the directness only children could manage. Jackson considered the question seriously. "Sometimes. But being scared doesn't mean you can't do what needs to be done." "Mom gets scared sometimes," Layla said matter-of-factly, "when the bills come or when I get sick and she can't afford to miss work. But she always figures it out." Mia felt heat rise in her cheeks, embarrassed by her daughter's casual revelation of their financial struggles. But when she looked at Jackson, she found no judgment in his expression, only understanding. "Your mom's braver than most soldiers I've known," he told Layla. "Taking care of someone you love when you're scared? That takes real courage." The unexpected praise made Mia's throat tighten with emotion. Most people saw her situation as failure, a single mother struggling to make ends meet. Jackson saw strength. After dinner, he delivered on his promise about s'mores, building a fire in the stone fireplace and producing marshmallows and chocolate from what seemed like thin air. Layla's delighted laughter filled the cabin as she attempted to perfect her marshmallow roasting technique under Jackson's patient guidance. "Not too close to the flames," he instructed. "You want it golden, not charcoal." "Like this." Layla held up a marshmallow that was only slightly blackened on one side. "Perfect," he pronounced, helping her assemble her first s'more. Watching them together, Mia felt something shift in her chest. Layla had never had a positive male figure in her life. Her father had vanished the moment he learned about the pregnancy, leaving only painful lessons about trusting men with promises. But here was Jackson, teaching her daughter about patience and precision while making her feel important and heard. "Your turn," he said, offering Mia a marshmallow-tipped stick. Their fingers brushed as she took it, and that familiar jolt of awareness shot through her. In the firelight, his features looked softer, more approachable. The controlled bodyguard facade had given way to something warmer and more human. I've never done this either, she admitted, feeling foolish about the admission. Here. He moved behind her, his large hands covering hers to guide the marshmallow's position over the flames. His chest pressed against her back, and she could feel his breath warm against her ear. Slow, steady rotation. Don't rush it. The lesson had nothing to do with marshmallows and everything to do with the electricity building between them. Mia found herself leaning into his warmth, her body responding to his proximity in ways that had nothing to do with safety and everything to do with desire. Like this, she managed, her voice slightly breathless. Exactly like that, he murmured, his hands still covering hers. The marshmallow was perfectly golden when they finally pulled it from the flames, but Mia barely noticed. She was too focused on the way Jackson's hands lingered on hers, the way his gray eyes seemed to see straight through her careful defenses. "Mom, you're staring again," Layla observed with 9-year-old bluntness. Mia jerked back, suddenly aware of how close she and Jackson had been standing. Heat flooded her cheeks as she busied herself with assembling her s'more, trying to ignore the knowing look her daughter was giving her. "Time for bed, sweetheart," she said quickly. "But it's only 8:30, Layla protested. "It's been a big day," Mia insisted, "and we don't know what tomorrow will bring." As she tucked Layla into the cabin's guest bed, her daughter caught her hand. "I like him, Mom. He's just here to keep us safe, baby." "I know, but I still like him, and I think he likes you too." Mia's heart clenched. Her daughter's ability to read situations with uncomfortable accuracy was both blessing and curse. "Layla, it's okay, Mom. You deserve someone who looks at you the way he does." The wisdom in her 9-year-old's voice made Mia's eyes sting with unexpected tears. "When did you get so smart?" "I pay attention," Layla said simply, "and I want you to be happy." When Mia returned to the main room, she found Jackson banking the fire for the night. The domestic scene felt too intimate, too much like something she'd dreamed about during countless nights of falling asleep alone. "She's settled," she reported, sitting on the opposite end of the couch. "Good kid," he said, settling beside her with a respectable distance between them. "Smart, resilient. You've done well with her." "I've done what I had to do. That's what makes you remarkable." His voice was quiet in the firelit room. "Most people talk about sacrifice and duty. You just live it." The praise made her uncomfortable in ways she couldn't name. "You don't know anything about me. I know you work 16-hour shifts to pay for nursing school. I know you read to elderly patients on your breaks. I know you mend your own clothes and choose between bills every month, but you've never let Layla see you break." The accuracy of his observations stunned her. "You researched me. I observe. It's what keeps people alive." He turned to face her more fully. "What I can't figure out is why you don't see what everyone else sees when they look at you." Which is strength, grace under pressure, the kind of person who deserves good things happening to them. Mia felt tears threaten again. People like me don't get fairy tale endings. Maybe it's time you stop deciding what you deserve based on what you've had before. The words hung between them, heavy with possibility and dangerous hope. In the flickering firelight, Jackson looked less like a professional bodyguard and more like a man who understood what it meant to build strength from broken pieces. "Tell me about your family," she said, needing to redirect the conversation away from her own vulnerabilities. His expression shuddered immediately. "There's nothing to tell. The way you are with Layla suggests otherwise. You know how to talk to children. I had a younger sister once." The words came out reluctantly, as if pulled from some carefully guarded place. "Sarah. She was 8 when I left for my first deployment." "Was. Car accident while I was overseas." "Drunk driver." His voice carried the flat tone of someone who'd learned to recite tragedy without breaking. "I was supposed to be there for her dance recital. Instead, I was halfway around the world playing soldier." The pain in his admission made Mia's chest ache. "You couldn't have prevented it." "Maybe not, but I could have been there. Could have been the brother she deserved instead of chasing some idea of duty and honor. Is that why you left the military? That's why I do this job. Second chances are rare, but when they come, he looked at her intently. Some people are worth protecting. The conversation was veering into territory that felt too personal, too loaded with implications neither of them was ready to address. But in the intimate cabin setting, with danger lurking somewhere outside their temporary haven, normal boundaries seemed inadequate. I should check the perimeter, Jackson said, standing abruptly. It's nearly 10 o'clock. Best time for surveillance. People get careless after dark. He was already reaching for his jacket, and Mia recognized the retreat for what it was. The conversation had revealed more than he had intended, and now he needed distance to rebuild his professional walls. "Jackson," she called as he reached the door. He turned back, his hand on the doorknob. "Thank you for everything today." Something shifted in his expression, a softening that made her pulse quicken. "Get some sleep, Mia. Tomorrow we figure out how to end this." After he left, Mia sat staring into the dying fire, trying to process everything that had changed in the span of 24 hours. Yesterday, her biggest concern had been whether she could afford new shoes for Layla before school started. Tonight, she was hiding in a mountain cabin with a man who made her feel things she'd sworn off after Layla's father destroyed her ability to trust. But Jackson wasn't like the men who disappointed her before. He'd proven his commitment to her safety in actions, not just words. And the way he looked at her, like she was someone worth protecting, worth knowing, made her want to believe in possibilities she'd given up long ago. The sound of footsteps on the cabin's front porch interrupted her thoughts. Jackson's voice, low and controlled, drifted through the door as he spoke into his phone. "Derek, it's me. Perimeter's clear, but I want surveillance on the access road through the night." A pause. "No, I'm staying put. This location is secure as long as we control access." Mia found herself moving closer to the window, drawn by the sound of his voice conducting the kind of conversation that reminded her how dangerous their situation really was. Through the glass, she could see him pacing the small front porch, his posture alert despite the late hour. When he finally came back inside, she was still standing by the window. "Everything okay?" she asked. "All quiet. Derek's got eyes on the main road, and there's only one way up here by vehicle." He locked the door with practiced efficiency. "You should be able to sleep safely. What about you?" "I'll rest when this is over." The dedication in his voice was both comforting and concerning. "When did you last sleep through the night?" "Sleep is a luxury in my line of work." "Jackson," she turned to face him fully, "you can't protect us if you collapse from exhaustion. I can handle a few sleepless nights, but you shouldn't have to." The words came out before she could stop them, revealing more concern than a client should show for her. Bodyguard. Their eyes met across the small living room, and the air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken possibilities. In the dim lighting, with the rest of the world locked outside, it would be easy to forget why they were here. Easy to focus instead on the way he looked at her like she was someone precious, someone worth staying awake to protect. "Mia," he said quietly, and her name on his lips sounded like both warning and invitation. "I know," she whispered. "I know this is complicated. More than complicated. Dangerous. The situation, or both." They stood frozen in that moment of honesty, both acknowledging the attraction building between them and the dozen reasons why acting on it would be a mistake. Professional boundaries existed for good reasons. Mixing personal feelings with protection details could get people killed. But knowing all of that didn't stop Mia from wanting to close the distance between them. Didn't stop her from wondering what it would feel like to be held by someone who'd proven his commitment to her safety. "I should go to bed," she finally said, though she made no move toward the stairs. "Yes," he agreed, though he didn't look away. "Good night, Jackson." "Good night." She was halfway up the stairs when he called her name again. Mia. She turned back to find him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Whatever happens tomorrow, whatever we have to face, you're stronger than you know. The words followed her up the stairs and into the small bedroom where she lay awake for hours, listening to the sound of Jackson moving quietly through the cabin below, protecting her, staying vigilant while she tried to sleep. For the first time in years, she wasn't facing crisis alone. The realization was both terrifying and liberating. She'd built her life around independence, around never needing anyone she couldn't depend on completely. But Jackson Brennan was proving dependable in ways that made her want to risk everything she'd learned about keeping her heart safe. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dangers, and difficult decisions about the inheritance that had turned her life upside down. But tonight, with a fire dying in the grate and a good man keeping watch, Mia Sullivan let herself imagine what it might feel like to stop fighting the world alone. The last thing she heard before sleep finally claimed her was the quiet sound of Jackson's footsteps on the stairs, checking locks one final time before settling into his own restless watch through the night. In her dreams, those footsteps came all the way to her door, and the man who'd spent the day saving her life spent the night showing her what it meant to be cherished instead of simply protected. Chapter 3. Mia woke to the sound of quiet conversation drifting up from the kitchen below. Sunlight streamed through the cabin's windows, and for a moment she forgot where she was. Then reality crashed back, the inheritance, the threats, the complicated feelings for the man who'd appointed himself her protector. She found Jackson and Layla in the kitchen, working together on what appeared to be an elaborate breakfast. Layla stood on a chair, carefully flipping pancakes under Jackson's watchful guidance. "The secret is patience," he was telling her. "Wait for the bubbles to form on the surface, then flip once, no peeking underneath." "Like this?" Layla asked, executing a perfect flip that made her beam with pride. "Exactly like that. You're a natural." The domestic scene made Mia's chest tighten with emotions she couldn't name. Layla had never had anyone take the time to teach her small skills like this. Mia was always too tired, too stressed, too focused on survival to linger over breakfast preparations. "Morning," she said from the doorway. Both Jackson and Layla turned toward her, and she was struck by how natural they looked together, like a family that had been practicing this routine for years instead of strangers thrown together by circumstance. "Mom, Jackson's teaching me to make real pancakes, not the frozen kind." Heat crept up Mia's neck, another reminder of the shortcuts and compromises that define their normal life. "That's wonderful, sweetheart." "Coffee's ready," Jackson said, his eyes meeting hers over Layla's head. "How did you sleep?" "Better than expected." It was mostly true. Once she'd finally fallen asleep, the mountain quiet had been more restful than her usual soundtrack of sirens and traffic noise. As they ate breakfast together, Mia found herself studying the easy rapport that had developed between Jackson and her daughter. Layla chattered about school, her friends, her hopes of getting a pet rabbit someday. Jackson listened with the kind of focused attention that made her feel important and heard. "Derek called this morning," he told Mia quietly while Layla was distracted by syrup patterns on her pancakes. "Tony's men searched the first safe house thoroughly after we left. They're not giving up." The words sent a chill through her. "How long can we stay here?" "As long as necessary," but he hesitated. "There's something else. Amelia wants to meet today. There's been a development in the legal case." "What kind of development?" She wouldn't say over the phone. "Too sensitive." Mia nodded, trying to push down the anxiety that threatened to overwhelm her appetite. Every conversation seemed to bring new complications, new dangers she'd never imagined facing. "We'll figure it out," Jackson said quietly, reading her expression. "Whatever it is, we'll handle it." The quiet confidence in his voice steadied her more than any reassurance about their safety. In less than 48 hours, he'd become her anchor in a storm that kept intensifying. After breakfast, While Layla explored the cabin's small library, Mia helped Jackson with dishes. The kitchen was small enough that they had to navigate around each other carefully, creating moments of accidental contact that sent awareness skittering through her nervous system. "You're good with her," she said, handing him a plate to dry. "She's easy to be good with. Smart kid, good instincts. She likes you." The words came out before Mia could stop them. "I like her too." He paused in his drying. "She reminds me of Sarah sometimes. That fearlessness kids have before the world teaches them to be afraid." The comparison made Mia's throat tight. "I worry I'm stealing that from her. All this moving around, the fear. You're protecting her. There's a difference. Is there? Sometimes I wonder if I should have just walked away from the inheritance. Let Tony have what he thinks belongs to him." Jackson set down the dish and turned to face her fully. "And then what? Go back to working 16-hour shifts while Tony Castillo nurses a grudge against the woman who almost stole his father's money? You think he'd still come after us? I think men like Tony don't forget perceived slights. Walking away now wouldn't make you safe, it would just make you poor and unprotected." The logic was sound, but it didn't ease the guilt eating at her. "I never asked for this." "No, you didn't. But Harrison Castillo saw something in you worth $50 million. Maybe it's time you started seeing it too." Their conversation was interrupted by his phone ringing. Derek's name appeared on the display, and Jackson's expression grew serious as he answered. "What's the situation?" A pause. "How many?" Another pause, longer this time. "We'll be ready." He hung up and immediately began moving with purpose, checking windows and gathering equipment from places Mia hadn't realized he'd hidden it. "What's wrong?" she asked, fear making her voice tight. Tony's men found the access road. Derek spotted 3 vehicles heading up the mountain. "How long do we have?" 20 minutes? Maybe less." He was already moving toward the stairs. "Get Layla and pack only what you absolutely need. We're leaving through the back." The next few minutes blurred into organized chaos. Mia threw essentials into a bag while Jackson conducted a rapid security sweep. Layla, sensing the urgency, packed her backpack without questions. "Where are we going?" she asked as they prepared to leave through the cabin's rear exit. "Somewhere safe," Mia said, hoping it was true. Jackson led them through the forest behind the cabin, moving with the kind of tactical awareness that reminded Mia of his military background. The terrain was rough, but he chose their path carefully, helping both Mia and Layla navigate fallen logs and steep sections. "There's a service road about half a mile through these trees," he explained quietly. "Derek will meet us there." They'd been walking for 10 minutes when the sound of vehicles reached them through the forest. Jackson immediately motioned for silence, pulling them behind a cluster of large boulders. Through the trees, Mia could see men spreading out around the cabin. They moved with military precision, surrounding the building before beginning their approach. Professional. Dangerous. "Stay down," Jackson whispered, his body positioned protectively between them and the cabin. One of the men kicked in the front door, and Mia heard shouts as they discovered the empty rooms. Her stomach clenched as she realized how close they'd come to being trapped inside. "This way," Jackson murmured after the voices faded. Quietly. They made it to the service road without incident, where Derek was waiting in a nondescript sedan. He was a stocky man with graying temples and alert eyes that immediately cataloged their condition. "They brought serious firepower," he reported to Jackson. "Military-grade weapons, tactical gear. This isn't just hired muscle anymore." "Tony's escalating," Jackson confirmed grimly. As they drove away from the mountain, Mia felt her temporary sense of security crumble. The cabin had felt like a refuge, a place where she could almost forget the danger they faced. Now they were running again, and Tony Castillo's determination seemed to grow stronger with each failed attempt to find them. "Where to now?" she asked. "Somewhere they won't think to look," Jackson said. "And we need to see Amelia. Whatever development she's discovered, It might be the key to ending this. The courthouse meeting took place in a secure conference room, with Derek providing security while Amelia spread documents across the polished table. Her expression was grim as she looked at Mia. "I've discovered why Tony is so desperate to stop you from claiming the inheritance," she began. "It's not just about the money." "What do you mean?" Mia asked. "Harrison didn't just leave you $50 million. He left you controlling interest in Castillo Industries. The inheritance makes you the majority shareholder of a company worth over $2 billion. The numbers seem surreal, incomprehensible. $2 billion. Tony stands to lose everything if you claim what Harrison left you, not just his inheritance, his position, his power, his entire identity." Jackson leaned forward. "That explains the escalation. He's not just fighting for money anymore. He's fighting for survival." "There's more," Amelia continued. "I've found evidence that Tony has been embezzling from the company for years. If you take control, a forensic audit would expose everything. He'd face criminal charges." "So this won't end until one of us is dead," Mia said quietly. "Or until he's in prison," Amelia corrected. "I've been working with federal investigators. They're building a case, but they need time." "How much time?" Jackson asked. "Weeks, possibly months?" The timeline stretched ahead of them, filled with constant danger and uncertainty. Mia thought about Layla, missing school and living in fear, about the impossible decision between claiming what was rightfully hers and protecting her daughter from a war she'd never chosen. "I need to think about this," she said finally. "Of course." But Mia, Amelia's voice was gentle. "Harrison chose you for a reason. He saw something in you that made him believe you could handle this responsibility. Don't let Tony's threats make you smaller than you are." As they left the courthouse, Mia felt the weight of impossible choices settling on her shoulders. In the parking garage, while Derek swept for surveillance devices, she found herself alone with Jackson for the first time since leaving the cabin. $2 billion, she said, trying to wrap her mind around the number. "Changes things, doesn't it?" "Everything." She looked at him, this man who'd risked his life to protect her, before either of them knew the true stakes. "Why are you still here?" "What do you mean?" "You signed up to protect someone who'd inherited $50 million. Now it's $2 billion in a corporate war. This is bigger than anything you agreed to handle." Jackson stepped closer, his gray eyes intense in the parking garage's harsh lighting. "You think I'm here because of the money?" "I think you're a professional who takes calculated risks. This situation just became a lot less calculated." "You're right," he said quietly. "This is bigger than anything I agreed to handle. The smart play would be to recommend a larger security firm and step away. But I don't abandon people who need me. Not anymore." The words carried the weight of old guilt and newer determination. Mia found herself studying his face, looking for signs of doubt or hesitation. She found neither. Even if it means facing professional killers instead of hired thugs. Even then, his certainty should have been comforting, but instead, it made her chest tight with emotion she couldn't afford. He was staying because of duty, because of his own need for redemption, not because of feelings that were becoming harder to ignore. "We should go," Derek called from across the garage. "Area's clean, but we shouldn't linger." The new safe house was an urban apartment in a building with good security and multiple exit routes, less scenic than the mountain cabin, but more practical for the long-term protection they now needed. As they settled into their new temporary home, Mia watched Jackson establish his security protocols with familiar efficiency. But something had changed since their conversation in the parking garage. The professional distance between them felt more forced, more deliberate. That evening, after Layla was asleep, she found him on the apartment's small balcony, maintaining watch over the street below. The city lights reflected off his features, highlighting the tension he'd been hiding throughout the day. "You're having second thoughts," she said, joining him at the railing. "About the assignment?" "No, about something." He was quiet for a long moment, his attention seemingly focused on the traffic patterns below. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. "This morning, watching you and Layla together, seeing how she trusts you completely, it reminded me what normal families look like. We're hardly normal. You're more normal than anything I've had in years." He turned to face her. "And that's the problem. I don't understand. I'm good at my job because I don't form attachments. I assess threats, neutralize them, and move on. But with you—" He stopped, running a hand through his hair. "With you and Layla, I'm starting to care about more than just keeping you alive." The admission hung between them, loaded with implications that neither was ready to address directly. "Is that so terrible?" she asked softly. "It could get you killed. When protection becomes personal, judgment gets compromised, or maybe it makes you fight harder. Maybe." His smile was rueful. "But it also makes me want things I can't have." "Like what?" "Like mornings that don't start with threat assessments, like bedtime stories and pancake lessons and all the ordinary moments that make a life instead of just survival." His words painted a picture of the family life Mia had dreamed about but never dared hope for. The idea that he might want the same things made her pulse quicken with dangerous possibility. "Jackson, I know all the reasons this is impossible." He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the conflict in his gray eyes. "But knowing something and feeling it are different things." They stood frozen in that moment of honesty, both acknowledging the attraction that had been building since their first meeting. The professional boundaries that should have kept them apart seemed flimsy against the weight of shared danger and growing trust. "We can't," she whispered, though she made no move to step away. "I know. It would complicate everything. I know. And Layla's watching everything we do, trying to figure out if you're someone she can count on staying." That stopped him. The reminder of her daughter's emotional investment in their situation sobered both of them instantly. "She deserves stability," he said quietly. "Yes, she does. And you deserve someone who can give you a normal life." "What I deserve and what I want aren't always the same thing." The words slipped out before she could stop them, revealing more than she'd intended. Jackson's eyes searched her face, and she saw the exact moment he understood what she was really saying. "Mia," he said, her name rough with longing. "I should go inside," she said, but her feet remained planted. "Yes, you should." Neither of them moved. The space between them seemed to shrink without either taking a step, drawn together by forces stronger than logic or professional protocol. "If things were different," he began, "but they're not." "No, they're not." The admission should have ended the moment, sent them both retreating to opposite corners of the apartment. Instead, it seemed to intensify the connection between them, the acknowledgement of impossibility making their attraction feel more urgent. "I should check the locks," Jackson said finally, though his eyes remained fixed on her face. "Yes, and you should get some sleep." "I should." But still neither moved, caught in the gravitational pull of something neither was prepared to name. In the distance, the city hummed with life, people going about their ordinary evening routines, unaware of the drama playing out on a seventh-floor balcony where two people were discovering that the heart didn't always follow the rules. It was Mia who finally broke the spell, stepping back with visible effort. "Good night, Jackson." "Good night." She was almost to the sliding door when he called her name. She turned back to find him watching her with an expression that made her knees weak. "Whatever happens with the inheritance, with Tony, with all of this, you're not facing it alone anymore." The promise wrapped around her like an embrace, and she carried it with her as she headed inside. But as she settled into the unfamiliar bed in yet another temporary refuge, Mia couldn't shake the feeling that the most dangerous threat to her carefully controlled life might not be Tony Castillo and his hired killers. It might be the man keeping watch outside her door, and the way he made her want to believe in possibilities she'd given up long ago. Tomorrow would bring new challenges in their fight against Tony's escalating violence. But tonight, in the quiet darkness of another safe house, Mia Sullivan let herself imagine what it would feel like to stop running from more than just external threats. The question was whether she had the courage to face the risk of trusting someone with more than just her safety. Whether she could risk trusting him with her heart. Chapter 4. The attack came 3 days later, just as they'd begun to establish a routine in the urban safe house. Mia was helping Layla with online schoolwork while Jackson monitored surveillance feeds from the building's security system. The normalcy felt precious and fragile, like something that could shatter at any moment. It did. The first sign of trouble was Derek's voice crackling through Jackson's radio, urgent and clipped. Multiple vehicles converging on your building. Professional teams, full tactical gear. You've got maybe 3 minutes. Jackson was already moving, his training taking over as he began the emergency evacuation protocol they had rehearsed. Mia, get Layla and the go bags, now. But as they reached the apartment's front door, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed from the stairwell. Too many footsteps, moving with the coordinated precision of a military assault team. Back door, Jackson commanded, drawing his weapon as he hustled them toward the apartment's rear exit. They made it halfway across the living room before the windows exploded. Glass showered the room as tactical teams rappelled from the roof, their movements synchronized and lethal. Jackson threw himself between the attackers and Mia's family, returning fire while shouting instructions. Bedroom! Lock the door and get down. Mia grabbed Layla and ran, her daughter's terrified cries cutting through the chaos of gunfire and shouted orders. Behind them, she could hear Jackson's controlled voice as he called for backup and tried to hold off an entire assault team single-handedly. The bedroom door had barely clicked shut when bullets began splintering the wood around the frame. Mia pulled Layla into the apartment's small bathroom, the only room without external windows. Stay down, baby, she whispered, her own voice shaking as she used her body to shield her daughter. Jackson will handle this. But even as she said the words, Mia knew they were facing something beyond what one man could handle, no matter how skilled. The sound of combat was moving closer to their door, and she could hear furniture being overturned as the battle raged through the apartment. Then, suddenly, silence. The quiet was more terrifying than the gunfire had been. Mia strained to hear any sound that might tell her whether Jackson was alive, whether the attackers were preparing to break down their final barrier. Mia! Jackson's voice, rough but recognizable, came through the bathroom door. It's me. You can come out. She opened the door to find him leaning heavily against the doorframe, blood seeping through his shirt sleeve. The apartment looked like a war zone, furniture destroyed, windows shattered, bullet holes scarring every wall. Are you hurt? She asked, immediately moving to examine his wound. Just a graze, he said, though his pale complexion suggested otherwise. Derek's team got here in time to even the odds. Layla peeked out from behind Mia, her eyes wide as she took in the destruction. Is it over? For now, Jackson said gently, but we need to go somewhere else. Somewhere they'll never think to look. An hour later, they were driving through suburbs Mia didn't recognize, following Derek's lead car toward what he described as the most secure location in the tri-state area. The adrenaline from the attack was wearing off, leaving her shaky and overwhelmed by how close they'd come to disaster. Where are we going? She asked as Jackson navigated winding country roads with his injured arm. My place, he said simply. Your place. Is that safe? Safer than anywhere else. It's not listed under my name, and the security system was designed by paranoid ex-military contractors. He glanced at her. Plus, it's the last place Tony would expect us to go. The house, when they reached it, was nothing like what Mia had expected. Instead of the sparse institutional space she'd imagined for a professional bodyguard, She found a warm, comfortable home with personal touches that revealed depths to Jackson she'd only glimpsed. Photographs on the mantel showed him in military uniform with his unit, including a younger version of himself with his arm around a pretty girl who had to be Sarah. Books filled built-in shelves, military history mixed with classic literature, and what appeared to be an extensive collection of children's books. "You kept Sarah's things," Mia observed softly, noting the small collection of items that clearly belonged to a young girl. "Some of them," he confirmed, his voice tight. "Her books, mostly." She loved to read. Layla gravitated immediately toward the children's section, running her fingers along familiar titles with the reverence of a fellow book lover. "This feels like a real home," she said, settling cross-legged on the floor with a worn copy of The Secret Garden. The simple observation seemed to affect Jackson more than any praise could have. "It's yours for as long as you need it," he told them both. While Layla explored the book collection, Mia insisted on properly treating Jackson's bullet wound. The injury was worse than he'd admitted. The bullet had gouged a deep furrow along his upper arm that would need careful cleaning and bandaging. "Sit," she commanded, guiding him to the kitchen table. "And don't tell me it's just a scratch." "I've seen enough wounds to know the difference." He submitted to her ministrations with surprising grace, though she could feel the tension in his muscles as she cleaned the wound. Her nursing training took over, her hands gentle but efficient as she worked. "You're good at this," he said quietly. "I've had practice. Layla's been accident-prone since she learned to walk." "That's not what I meant." His gray eyes found hers as she concentrated on applying antiseptic. "You're good at taking care of people. It's not just technical skill, it's something deeper." The praise made her hands still for a moment. "Harrison Castillo said something similar, that I treated him like a person instead of a patient. That's why he chose you. Not because you were kind to him specifically, but because kindness is who you are." Their faces were close as she worked, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his gray eyes, the way his breathing changed when her fingers brushed his skin. The domestic intimacy of the moment, tending his wounds in his kitchen while her daughter read nearby, felt dangerously like the life she'd dreamed about but never dared hope for. "There," she said softly, securing the bandage. "That should hold." But neither of them moved away. The space between them seemed charged with all the tension that had been building since their first meeting, amplified by the day's brush with mortality. "Mia," he said, her name rough with longing. "I know," she whispered. "I know we can't." Today, when those bullets started flying, he stopped, struggling with words. "All I could think about was getting to you and Layla. Not completing the mission or maintaining professional distance, just protecting the two people who'd somehow become everything to me." The admission broke something open in her chest. "Jackson, I love you," he said quietly, the words carrying the weight of absolute truth. "I love your strength and your grace and the way you make me believe in things I'd given up on. I love watching you with Layla, seeing how you've raised this incredible kid despite everything working against you." Tears stung her eyes. "You can't love me. It's too dangerous, too complicated." "Too late," he said simply. "The damage is already done." She should have stepped away then, should have reminded them both of all the reasons this was impossible. Instead, she found herself reaching up to touch the scar above his eyebrow, the one she'd noticed that first day in Amelia's office. "I love you too," she whispered. "God help me. I love you too." The words seemed to break the last of his restraint. His hands came up to frame her face, and then his lips were on hers, gentle at first, then with growing hunger as weeks of suppressed longing finally found expression. The kiss was everything she'd imagined, and nothing she'd prepared for. Tender and desperate, careful and consuming. It tasted like hope and felt like coming home after a lifetime of wandering. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, the kitchen seemed charged with new possibilities. "Mom?" Layla's voice from the living room made them spring apart like guilty teenagers. "Can I make some hot chocolate?" "Of course, sweetheart," Mia called back, her voice only slightly unsteady. "I'll be right there." She turned back to Jackson, seeing her own emotional turmoil reflected in his expression. Everything had changed with that kiss, and there was no going back to the careful professional distance they had maintained. "What do we do now?" she asked quietly. "Now we figure out how to make this work," he said, his voice carrying new determination, "because I am not walking away from you." Not ever. The evening took on a dreamlike quality as they settled into the rhythm of his home. Layla claimed the guest room, delighted to have her own space again after days of shared accommodations. Jackson prepared dinner while Mia explored the house, marveling at the personal touches that revealed so much about the man she'd fallen in love with. Later, after Layla was asleep and the house was quiet, they found themselves alone in his living room, the weight of unfinished conversations settling between them. "Tell me about Sarah," Mia said softly, settling beside him on the couch. Jackson was quiet for a long moment, his fingers tracing patterns on the fabric between them. "She was 8 when I enlisted. Brilliant, funny, absolutely fearless. She wanted to be everything, a doctor, a teacher, an astronaut, usually all in the same week. You blame yourself for what happened to her. I wasn't there when she needed me. I was halfway around the world playing hero while my little sister died alone in a hospital room. You couldn't have known, but I could have been there, could have made different choices." He looked at her then, his eyes heavy with old grief. "That's why I do this job. Why I can't walk away from people who need protection. And that's why you're afraid to let yourself care about Layla and me. I'm terrified," he admitted, "because losing you would destroy me in ways that losing Sarah did, but worse. Because this time, I'd know exactly what I was giving up." Mia reached for his hand, intertwining their fingers. "Then don't lose us." "It's not that simple. My job, this life, it's dangerous for anyone close to me. More dangerous than inheriting $2 billion from a man whose son wants me dead." The observation drew a rueful smile from him. "Point taken. Jackson, look at me." She waited until his eyes met hers. "I'm not asking for guarantees about the future. I'm asking for right now, for this moment, in this house, with your arms around me and no one shooting at us." "Right now," he repeated softly. "Right now." This time, when he kissed her, there was no hesitation, no holding back. His mouth moved against hers with reverent hunger, as if he were memorizing the taste and texture of her lips. She responded with equal fervor, her hands fisting in his shirt as she pulled him closer. "Are you sure?" he whispered against her mouth. "I've never been more sure of anything." He stood and extended his hand to her, a question in his eyes. She took it without hesitation, letting him lead her upstairs to his bedroom. The room was masculine but warm, with large windows that overlooked the property's wooded grounds. Moonlight filtered through the curtains, casting silver patterns across the hardwood floors. They stood facing each other beside his bed, suddenly uncertain despite the certainty that had brought them here. "I haven't done this in a long time," Mia admitted quietly. "Neither have I," he said. "Not like this." Not when it mattered. The honesty broke through her nervousness. This wasn't just physical desire. It was the culmination of trust and affection that had been building between them. It was choosing to be vulnerable with someone who'd proven worthy of that gift. When he reached for her, his touch was gentle, reverent. His hands skimmed over her shoulders, down her arms, mapping the contours of her body like something precious he'd been given permission to explore. "You're so beautiful," he murmured, his lips trailing along her collarbone. "So incredibly beautiful." She helped him remove his shirt, careful of his bandaged arm, then let her hands explore the plains of his chest, the scars that told stories of battles fought and survived. Each mark was evidence of his strength, his survival, his journey to this moment with her. When he lifted her onto the bed, his movements were slow and deliberate, as if he wanted to savor every second. The crisp sheets felt cool against her skin, but his touch was warm, creating trails of sensation that made her pulse quicken. "I love you," he whispered against her throat, the words more prayer than declaration. "Show me," she breathed, arching into his caress. And he did. With hands that trembled slightly despite their evident skill, with lips that worshipped every inch of skin they encountered, with a tenderness that made her understand the difference between mere physical pleasure and true intimacy. When they finally came together completely, it was with a sense of rightness that transcended the physical. In the silver darkness of his bedroom, they discovered a language only hearts could speak, each touch and whispered endearment writing poetry on willing skin. Time seemed to stop as they moved together, finding a rhythm as natural as breathing. There was no urgency, no desperate rush toward completion, only the sweet, building intensity of two people discovering what it meant to be truly known by another. When the world finally shattered around them, it was with a completeness that left them both shaking, clinging to each other as if they could anchor the moment and make it last forever. Afterward, they lay entwined in the moonlight, skin damp with exertion, hearts gradually slowing from their frantic pace. "That was," Mia began, then stopped, unable to find words adequate to the experience. "Perfect," Jackson finished softly. "That was perfect." She nestled closer to his warmth, her head on his chest where she could hear the steady beat of his heart. "I never knew it could be like that." "Like what?" "Like coming home." His arms tightened around her, and she felt him press a kiss to the top of her head. "For me, too." They lay in comfortable silence for a while, processing the magnitude of what had just happened between them. The physical intimacy had been extraordinary, but the emotional connection was what would change everything. There was no going back to professional distance now, no pretending that what they felt was anything less than love. "What happens tomorrow?" Mia asked eventually. "Tomorrow we start figuring out how to build a life together," he said quietly. "How to keep you and Layla safe while we fight for what Harrison left you. And after that? When this is all over? After that, we get to find out what normal looks like." His voice carried a smile she could hear even in the darkness. Pancake breakfasts and bedtime stories and all those ordinary moments that make a life worth living. The picture he painted was everything she'd dreamed of, but never dared hope for. A real family, a true partnership, a love strong enough to overcome any obstacle. "I want that," she whispered. "So do I, more than I've ever wanted anything." As she drifted off to sleep in his arms, Mia felt something she hadn't experienced in years: absolute safety. Not just physical protection, though Jackson certainly provided that, but the deeper security that came from being completely known and loved anyway. Tomorrow would bring new challenges in their fight against Tony's escalating violence. But tonight, in the quiet sanctuary of Jackson's bedroom, she'd found something worth fighting for beyond mere survival. She'd found home. Chapter 5. Single Mom Inherits Billionaire's Fortune, Part 5. Mia woke to the scent of coffee and the sound of quiet laughter drifting from downstairs. For a moment, wrapped in Jackson's sheets with morning sunlight streaming through his windows, she allowed herself to pretend this was her real life, that she wasn't a woman in hiding, but simply someone who'd found love and safety in equal measure. The illusion shattered when she reached for her phone and found 17 missed calls from Amelia Hart. She dressed quickly and hurried downstairs to find Jackson and Layla in the kitchen, working together on what appeared to be elaborate omelets. The domestic scene made her heart clench with longing, even as anxiety about the missed calls churned in her stomach. "Morning," Jackson said, his eyes finding hers with an intimacy that made heat rise in her cheeks. The memory of the night before hung between them, changing everything about how they looked at each other. "Amelia's been trying to reach me," Mia said, holding up her phone. His expression immediately shifted to professional alertness. How many calls? 17 since 6 a.m. That's not good. He was already reaching for his own phone. "Derek, we need a secure line to Amelia Hart immediately." Within minutes, they were connected to the lawyer through an encrypted video call. Amelia's face appeared on Jackson's laptop screen, and her expression was grim enough to make Mia's stomach drop. "Thank God you're all right," Amelia said without preamble. "There's been a development. Tony's escalating beyond anything we anticipated." "What kind of development?" Jackson asked, his arm sliding protectively around Mia's shoulders. "He's filed emergency court papers claiming you've kidnapped Layla. He's arguing that the inheritance has made you mentally unstable and dangerous to your own child." Mia felt the blood drain from her face. "That's insane. Layla's here with me by choice." "I know that. You know that, but Tony's hired excellent lawyers. They're painting a picture of a single mother who's lost touch with reality due to sudden wealth, who's enlisted the help of a dangerous ex-military contractor to hide from imaginary threats." "The threats aren't imaginary," Jackson said coldly. "His men attacked us twice with military-grade weapons. Attacks that conveniently left no witnesses except you three, and no evidence except property damage that could be explained by break-ins." Amelia's frustration was evident. Tony's covering his tracks while building a case that you're all suffering from shared delusions. "So what does this mean?" Mia asked, though she was afraid she already knew. "It means Child Protective Services is looking for Layla. They have a court order to take her into protective custody pending a psychological evaluation of you." The words hit Mia like a physical blow. "They want to take my daughter?" "Temporarily, until they can determine whether you're fit to parent." "But that's exactly what Tony wants," Jackson said. "Get Layla away from our protection. Use her as leverage to force Mia to renounce the inheritance." "I know, and I'm fighting it with every legal tool available. But Mia," Amelia's voice gentled, "you need to understand what we're up against. Tony has unlimited resources and no conscience about using them. This is psychological warfare designed to break you down." Mia looked at Layla, who was quietly eating her omelet while pretending not to listen to the adult conversation. Her daughter had already been through so much, the constant moving, the fear, the disruption of her normal life. The thought of her being taken by strangers, placed in foster care while bureaucrats decided her fate, was unbearable. "How long do we have?" she asked quietly. "They'll likely serve the order within 24 hours. After that, hiding Layla could be considered kidnapping yourself. So we have until tomorrow to figure this out. Or," Amelia hesitated, "you could consider Tony's standing offer. Renounce the inheritance publicly, and all of this goes away." "Absolutely not," Jackson said immediately. "The moment she gives up legal protection, Tony will have her killed to ensure she can never change her mind." "But if it means keeping Layla safe—" "It doesn't," he interrupted firmly. "Tony isn't the kind of man who honors deals with people he sees as beneath him. He'd take everything and eliminate the threat you represent." After the call ended, they sat in heavy silence around the kitchen table. Layla had finished her breakfast and was looking between the adults with the perceptive concern of a child who understood more than she let on. "Are they going to take me away?" she asked quietly. Mia's throat closed. "We're going to do everything we can to prevent that, sweetheart." "But they might?" "Yes," Mia said, because lying to her daughter had never been an option. "They might." Layla nodded with the solemn acceptance of a child who'd learned early that adults didn't always have control over their circumstances. "If they do, I'll tell them you're the best mom ever and that I want to come home." The simple declaration broke Mia's heart and strengthened her resolve simultaneously. "You're not going anywhere if I can help it." "We're not going anywhere," Jackson corrected gently. "This is our fight now." The possessive pronoun sent warmth through Mia despite their dire circumstances. Somehow, in the space of a few days, they'd become a unit, a family facing crisis together. "I have an idea." Derek's voice came from the doorway, where he'd been quietly listening. "It's risky, but it might be our only play." "What kind of idea?" Jackson asked. "We leak the truth about Tony's embezzlement to the press, force his hand before he can use the legal system against you." "That could backfire spectacularly." Amelia's voice came through the still open laptop connection. "Media attention could make everything worse." "Or it could expose Tony for what he really is," Derek countered. "Right now, he's controlling the narrative. What if we change that?" Mia found herself torn between hope and terror. Going public would mean the end of any semblance of normal life, but it might also be the key to protecting Layla and claiming what Harrison had left her. "There's something else," Jackson said quietly. "Something I haven't told you about Tony Castillo." All eyes turned to him. "What do you mean?" 3 years ago, before I went into private security, I was approached about a contract job. High paying, no questions asked. When I researched the client, I discovered it was Tony Castillo, and the target was a business partner who discovered his embezzlement. "You turned it down?" Mia asked. "I turned it down, but someone else didn't. The business partner died in what looked like a climbing accident 2 weeks later." The revelation sent chills through the room. "You have proof of this?" "Enough to raise serious questions. And if we're going public anyway." Jackson's expression was grim. "Tony's killed before to protect his secrets. That changes the stakes considerably." "What would you do if claiming your inheritance meant putting your child in constant danger, but walking away meant returning to a life of endless struggle?" Sometimes there's no perfect choice, only the courage to fight for what's right. Drop your thoughts below and make sure you're subscribed for the explosive conclusion coming up. The decision to go public was made in Jackson's living room, with Layla coloring at the coffee table while the adults planned what amounted to a declaration of war against one of the most powerful men in the state. "We'll need irrefutable evidence," Amelia said over the video connection. "Financial records, communications, anything that proves the embezzlement and connects Tony to violence." "I can get into Castillo Industries' servers," Derek offered, "but it'll take time, and once I'm detected, they'll know we're coming for them." "How much time?" Jackson asked. 6 hours, maybe 8 if their security is sloppy. "That's cutting it close with the custody order." "Then we don't wait," Mia said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. "We do the press conference first, based on what we already know. Force Tony to respond publicly instead of hiding behind lawyers and court orders." "That's incredibly dangerous," Amelia warned, "if you're wrong about any of the details. But if we're right, we expose him before he can use the legal system to separate my family." Jackson studied her face carefully. "You're sure about this? Once we go public, there's no taking it back." "I'm sure." And she was. The thought of losing Layla to Tony's machinations was unbearable. Better to fight openly than be destroyed quietly. "Harrison Castillo chose me for a reason. Maybe it's time I started acting like someone worthy of that trust." The press conference was scheduled for that afternoon at a downtown hotel. While Derek worked on gathering evidence and Amelia prepared legal statements, Mia found herself alone with Jackson for the first time since their night together. "Are you having second thoughts?" she asked, watching him clean his weapons with practiced efficiency. "About the press conference?" "No." "About us?" That made him look up from his task. "Why would you think that?" "Because this morning, everything changed. Last night we were—" She struggled for words. "We crossed a line that can't be uncrossed, and now we're about to put everything on public display." Jackson set down his weapon and crossed to where she stood by the window. His hands framed her face with the same tenderness he'd shown the night before. "Mia, look at me." His gray eyes were intense, absolutely certain. What happened between us last night was the best thing that's ever happened to me. I don't care who knows it, and I don't care what complications it creates. Even if it compromises your professional reputation. My professional reputation means nothing compared to keeping you and Layla safe. His thumbs brushed across her cheekbones. I love you. I love your daughter. I love the family we're becoming, and I'll fight anyone who tries to destroy that. The declaration made her heart soar, even as anxiety about the afternoon pressed down on her. What if this all goes wrong? What if Tony wins and Layla gets hurt because of choices I made? Then we'll face it together. But Mia, you can't let fear of the worst-case scenario keep you from fighting for what's right. You sound like you're speaking from experience. I am. I spent 3 years letting guilt and fear keep me from caring about anything that mattered. If I'd stayed in that place, I never would have met you. He kissed her then, soft and reassuring, a promise that whatever happened in the coming hours, they were facing it as a team. The hotel conference room was packed with reporters when they arrived. News of the mysterious inheritance and the subsequent legal battles had already attracted media attention, but the promise of explosive revelations had drawn every major outlet in the region. Mia sat at the podium table between Jackson and Amelia, acutely aware of the cameras focused on her face. Layla was safely hidden with Derek in a secure location, protected from the media circus but close enough for rapid extraction if needed. Ladies and gentlemen, Amelia began, we're here today to expose a pattern of fraud, embezzlement, and violence that goes to the heart of one of the state's most prominent business empires. For the next hour, they laid out their case against Tony Castillo with methodical precision. Financial irregularities spanning years, suspicious deaths of business partners who'd asked too many questions, the escalating violence against Mia and her family. These attacks aren't random acts of desperation, Jackson said when it was his turn to speak. They're the calculated actions of a man who's built his fortune on theft and maintained it through intimidation. In the recent court filing regarding my daughter, Mia added, her voice steady despite the cameras, is simply the latest attempt to use legal manipulation to cover up criminal activity. The questions from reporters came fast and sharp, about the evidence, about her relationship with Jackson, about whether she was prepared for Tony's retaliation. I'm prepared to do whatever it takes to protect my family and claim what Harrison Castillo rightfully left me, she said in response to the last question. Tony Castillo has spent his life taking what doesn't belong to him. That stops now. As they left the hotel, Mia felt simultaneously exhilarated and terrified. They'd declared war publicly in front of cameras that would broadcast their accusations to millions of people. There was no going back now. How long before Tony responds? She asked as they climbed into Derek's vehicle. He's probably already responding, Jackson said grimly, checking his phone. Derek, any word from your contacts? Tony's lawyers are calling for an emergency hearing tomorrow morning. They're claiming you've slandered their client and demanding immediate legal remedy. Which means we better have ironclad proof by tomorrow, or we're all going to jail for defamation. As they drove through the city toward their safe house, Mia watched the familiar landmarks blur past and wondered if she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life, or the smartest decision. Either way, there was no turning back now. The battle for Harrison Castillo's legacy had become a very public war, and the whole world was watching to see who would emerge victorious. The question was whether love and determination would be enough to defeat money and ruthless ambition. Tomorrow, they'd find out. Chapter 6. The call came at 3 a.m, shattering the uneasy sleep Mia had finally managed to find in Jackson's arms. Derek's voice was tight with urgency as it crackled through the secure line. They've got Layla. Mia was instantly awake, ice flooding her veins. What do you mean they've got her? Professional extraction team hit the safe house 20 minutes ago. Clean, efficient, no trace evidence. This wasn't random. They knew exactly where she was and how to get in. Jackson was already moving, pulling on clothes with military efficiency while his phone buzzed with incoming calls. Casualties? 2 of my men in the hospital, but they'll live. Layla wasn't hurt. This was a precision kidnapping, not a kill mission. Because they need her alive for leverage, Mia said, the tactical reality cutting through her maternal panic. Tony's going to use her to force me to sign away the inheritance. Her phone rang before anyone could respond. Unknown number, but she knew instinctively who it would be. Answer it, Jackson said grimly, but keep him talking. Tony Castillo's voice was smooth, cultured, and absolutely cold. Miss Sullivan, I trust... You slept well? Where is my daughter? Mia kept her voice steady through sheer force of will. Safe. Comfortable, fed and watered like the valuable asset she is. The casual cruelty in his tone made her want to scream. Though I'm afraid her continued well-being depends entirely on your cooperation. What do you want? I want you to hold another press conference. This time, you'll announce that you've decided to renounce any claim to my father's estate. You'll apologize for the malicious lies you spread yesterday and remove yourself from my family's business permanently. And if I do that, you'll let Layla go? Eventually, after a reasonable period to ensure you don't change your mind again. The non-answer confirmed what Jackson had predicted. Tony had no intention of honoring any agreement. He'd keep Layla as insurance indefinitely, or until he decided the threat Mia represented was permanently neutralized. I need proof she's alive and unharmed, Mia said. Of course. How very maternal of you. The line went quiet for a moment, then Layla's voice came through, small but brave. Mom? I'm okay. They gave me books to read and the food isn't terrible. Even in terror, her daughter was trying to comfort her. The realization nearly broke Mia's composure entirely. Baby, are you hurt? No, I'm fine. But Mom, don't give them what they want. You taught me never to negotiate with bullies. The line went dead before Mia could respond, leaving her staring at the phone with tears streaming down her face. Her 9-year-old daughter was being held hostage, and she was giving advice about standing up to the people who'd taken her. She's right, Jackson said quietly. You can't give Tony what he wants. That's my daughter. I know. And I know how much you love her. But surrendering won't save her. It'll just give Tony everything he wants before he kills all of us anyway. So what do you suggest? Let him keep her while we fight a legal battle that could take months? No. Jackson's expression was grimmer than she'd ever seen it. We get her back. Tonight. The plan Derek outlined was simple in concept, terrifying in execution. Tony was holding Layla at his father's mansion, the same estate that was technically part of Mia's inheritance. The irony wasn't lost on any of them. Security will be heavy but predictable, Derek explained, spreading blueprints across Jackson's dining table. Tony's arrogant enough to think we won't try a direct assault. Because we're not military anymore, Jackson added. He's expecting us to negotiate or go through legal channels. What he's not expecting is a coordinated strike team with inside knowledge of the property. Derek pointed to several locations on the blueprints. I've got 3 men positioned around the perimeter. We go in fast, extract Layla, and get out before they can coordinate a response. What about after? Mia asked. Even if we get her back, Tony will just try again. Not if we get the evidence we need. During the extraction, Amelia's voice came through the secure video link. I've been working with federal investigators all night. If you can get into Tony's private office, there's a safe containing documents that will prove the embezzlement and connect him to multiple murders. So this becomes more than a rescue mission, Jackson said. We're also conducting a burglary. We're reclaiming stolen property, Amelia corrected. That mansion belongs to Mia now, along with everything in it. The distinction felt academic when Mia considered what they were actually planning. A military-style assault on a fortified position with her daughter's life hanging in the balance. "I'm going with you," she announced. "Absolutely not," Jackson said immediately. "She's my daughter." "Which is exactly why you need to stay here where it's safe, if something goes wrong." "If something goes wrong, I want to be there." Mia's voice carried a finality that brooked no argument. "I'm not sitting in a safe house while other people risk their lives for my family." "Mia, you're not trained for this kind of operation." "Then train me." Fast. The next several hours passed in a blur of tactical instruction and equipment preparation. Mia learned to use communication devices, night vision equipment, and basic weapons handling. Not enough to make her an asset in combat, but enough to keep her from being a liability. "Remember," Jackson said as they prepared to leave, "your job is to get to Layla and get her out. Leave the fighting to us." "What about the safe?" "I'll handle that. You focus on your daughter." But as they approached the Castillo mansion under cover of darkness, Mia knew the plan was about to become infinitely more complicated. The building was lit up like a fortress, with more security personnel visible than Derek had anticipated. "He's expecting us." Derek's voice crackled through their communication system. "This feels like a trap." "It is a trap," Jackson confirmed grimly. "But we're walking into it anyway because we don't have a choice." They moved through the mansion's gardens with practiced stealth, but Mia could feel the weight of watching eyes. Tony had turned her inheritance into a battlefield, and they were walking directly into the crosshairs. The first gunshot shattered the night silence just as they reached the main building. Not aimed at them, but fired into the air, a signal that their presence had been detected. "So much for stealth," Derek muttered. "New plan. We go loud and fast." What followed was 15 minutes of controlled chaos as Jackson's team fought their way through the mansion's ground floor while Mia searched frantically for any sign of her daughter. The house she now technically owned had become a war zone, with bullets splintering antique furniture and shattering priceless artwork. She found Layla in what had once been Harrison's study, tied to a chair but unharmed, her eyes wide with fear but alert with intelligence. "Mom!" Layla's voice was muffled by the gag across her mouth, but her relief was unmistakable. "I'm here, baby. I'm here." Mia's hands shook as she worked to untie the ropes. "Are you hurt?" Layla shook her head as soon as the gag was removed. "They didn't hurt me." "But Mom, it's a trap. Tony's not here. He's at his other house. This was all to get you and Jackson in one place." The realization hit Mia like a physical blow. They'd walked directly into an ambush, and now they were trapped in a building surrounded by armed men with no clear escape route. "Jackson," she spoke into her radio, "Layla says this is a setup. Tony's not here." "Copy that. We've got the safe open, but—" His voice was cut off by the sound of automatic weapons fire. "We've got bigger problems. There are at least 20 men surrounding the building." As if summoned by his words, Tony Castillo's voice echoed through the mansion's intercom system. "Miss Sullivan, I do hope you're enjoying your inheritance, though I'm afraid your time as an heiress is about to come to an end." "Mom, what's he talking about?" Layla whispered. Before Mia could answer, Derek's panicked voice crackled through the radio. "Jackson, we've got company. Federal agents, SWAT teams, the works. Someone tipped them off about an armed assault in progress. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Tony hadn't just set a trap for them. He had arranged for law enforcement to find them in the middle of what would look like a violent home invasion. Even if they survived the night, they'd be arrested for breaking and entering, assault, and kidnapping." "Jackson, where are you?" Mia called into her radio. "Second floor, Harrison's private office. I've got the evidence, but we're pinned down. Can you get to us?" "Working on it. Stay put and keep Layla safe," but staying put wasn't an option. Through the study windows, Mia could see federal agents taking positions around the mansion's perimeter. In minutes, they'd storm the building and find her and Layla in what would appear to be a hostage situation. "We have to move," she told her daughter. "Can you run?" "Yes, but where are we going?" "To find Jackson and get out of here before the police decide we're the bad guys." They made it halfway across the mansion's main floor before running into Tony's security team. 3 men in tactical gear, moving with professional precision as they searched room by room. Mia pulled Layla behind an ornate sofa just as the first man entered their hiding place. Her heart hammered against her ribs as footsteps approached their position, knowing they had nowhere left to run. "Clear!" one of the men called, and Mia realized they'd somehow missed seeing them in the shadows, but their luck ran out at the mansion's grand staircase. As they crept toward the second floor, one of Tony's men spotted them and raised his weapon. "Stop right there!" Mia shoved Layla behind the marble banister just as gunfire erupted around them. The man was aiming to kill, not capture, confirming that Tony had decided eliminating witnesses was more important than maintaining his legal fiction. Then Jackson appeared at the top of the stairs like an avenging angel, his return fire dropping the gunman before he could get off another shot. "This way," he called, and they ran toward him as more of Tony's men converged on their position. The next few minutes were a blur of tactical movement through the mansion's upper floors, with Jackson leading them toward an escape route Derek had identified during their planning. But every step brought them closer to the federal agents surrounding the building, and Mia could hear police radios getting closer. "There!" Jackson pointed toward a window that opened onto the mansion's roof. "Derek's got extraction positioned on the other side of the building." But as they prepared to climb through the window, Mia heard something that made her stomach drop. Layla's breathing had become labored, wheezy, and her lips were turning pale. "Baby, what's wrong?" "Can't breathe," Layla gasped, her hand clutching at her chest. "Inhaler, left it." Asthma attack, triggered by stress and physical exertion, and her rescue inhaler was back at the safe house with the rest of her medications. "Jackson," Mia called desperately, "we have a medical emergency." He was beside them instantly, his combat awareness shifting to assessment of Layla's condition. "How bad?" "Bad. She needs medical attention now, or—" Mia couldn't finish the sentence. The choice crystallized with terrible clarity. Continue running and risk Layla dying from asthma, or surrender to federal agents who might arrest them but would also provide medical care. "There's a third option," Jackson said quietly, reading her thoughts. "I surrender to the feds and turn over Tony's evidence. You and Layla get medical attention and legal protection." "No," Mia said immediately. "We're not splitting up." "Mia, look at me." His gray eyes were steady despite the chaos around them. "I love you. I love Layla, which means her life is more important than my freedom." Before she could argue, he was speaking into his radio. "Derek, abort extraction. I'm surrendering to federal custody with evidence of Tony Castillo's crimes." Then he was kissing her, quick and desperate and full of love. "Take care of our daughter," he whispered against her lips. "Jackson, no." But he was already moving toward the mansion's front entrance, hands raised, calling out his surrender to the federal agents outside. Through the window, Mia watched him emerge from the building with his hands up, dropping weapons and slowly removing the evidence files from his vest. The federal agents swarmed him immediately, but she could see him talking, gesturing toward the mansion, explaining about Layla's medical emergency. Minutes later, paramedics were rushing into the building, guided by the same federal agents who'd been prepared to treat them as terrorists. Layla's condition stabilized quickly, with proper medication, but the relief was overshadowed by watching Jackson being loaded into a federal transport vehicle. "Miss Sullivan." The agent in charge was a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. "I'm Agent Sarah Martinez." "We need to talk." Over the next several hours, as Layla recovered in a federal medical facility and Jackson was processed into federal custody, Mia told the complete story to Agent Martinez and her team. The inheritance, Tony's threats, the evidence they had discovered, and the desperate rescue mission that had brought them all together. The documents your partner provided are extraordinary, Agent Martinez said as dawn broke over the city. We've been investigating Tony Castillo for years, but could never get the evidence we needed. What happens now? Now we build a case that will put him away for the rest of his life. As for you and your daughter, the agent smiled. You're free to go home, wherever home is these days. But home, Mia realized, wasn't a place anymore. Home was wherever Jackson was, and he was sitting in a federal detention facility awaiting charges that might send him to prison for years. Can I see him? She asked. Not yet. But Miss Sullivan, what he did tonight, surrendering to protect you and your daughter, that's going to weigh heavily in his favor when this all gets sorted out. As Mia held her sleeping daughter in the federal facility's family room, she realized that the inheritance that had started this whole nightmare might finally be within her grasp. Tony's crimes were exposed, his threats neutralized, and Harrison Castillo's legacy was about to be claimed by the woman he'd chosen to receive it. But victory felt hollow without the man she'd fallen in love with beside her to share it. The battle for the inheritance was almost over, but the fight for their family was just beginning. Chapter 7. 3 weeks later, Mia stood in the marble lobby of the federal courthouse, her hands smoothing nervous wrinkles from the navy suit Amelia had insisted she wear for Tony's arraignment. Beside her, Layla fidgeted with the hem of her dress, both of them waiting for the moment that would determine whether justice would finally be served. Are you ready for this? Amelia asked, approaching with a briefcase full of documents that would seal Tony Castillo's fate. As ready as I'll ever be, Mia replied, though her eyes kept drifting toward the courtroom doors. Somewhere beyond those doors, Jackson was waiting to testify about the evidence he'd risked everything to obtain. She hadn't seen him since the night of the rescue, 3 weeks that felt like 3 years. Federal prosecutors had kept him in protective custody while they built their case, allowing only brief phone conversations that felt inadequate for everything she needed to say. Remember, Amelia said gently, today is about Tony's crimes, not about your relationship with Jackson. The prosecutors are confident about the charges, but we need to stay focused. Mia nodded, though her heart was hammering against her ribs. Today would determine not just Tony's punishment, but whether the man she loved would face charges of his own for the methods he'd used to protect her family. The courtroom was packed with reporters and federal officials when they finally entered. Tony sat at the defendant's table in an expensive suit that couldn't disguise the defeat in his posture. 3 weeks of federal investigation had unraveled decades of carefully hidden crimes, and his empire was crumbling around him. But Mia's attention went immediately to the witness section, where Jackson sat in a dark suit that made him look both powerful and vulnerable. Their eyes met across the courtroom, and the smile he gave her was soft with love and bright with determination. All rise, the bailiff called, and the proceedings began. For the next 4 hours, federal prosecutors methodically dismantled Tony Castillo's life. The evidence Jackson had retrieved from the mansion safe detailed decades of embezzlement, fraud, and worse. Bank records showing millions siphoned from company accounts, communications arranging the deaths of business partners who'd grown suspicious, a paper trail of corruption that read like a criminal manual. When Jackson took the stand, his testimony was clear, concise, and devastating. He detailed the threats against Mia's family, the escalating violence, and the evidence they'd discovered about Tony's criminal enterprise. And why did you risk your career and freedom to obtain this evidence? The prosecutor asked. Jackson's eyes found Mia's again before he answered. Because Mia Sullivan and her daughter deserved protection from a dangerous criminal. Because Harrison Castillo's final wishes deserved to be honored. And because sometimes doing the right thing matters more than following proper procedure. The defense attorney tried to paint him as a rogue operator, motivated by money or romance, but Jackson's calm professionalism and Derek's corroborating testimony made those arguments fall flat. When the prosecutor called Mia to testify, she walked to the witness stand on unsteady legs, acutely aware of every eye in the courtroom. This was her moment to finally claim her voice in the story that had consumed her life. "Miss Sullivan," the prosecutor began, "can you tell the court how this ordeal began?" For the next hour, Mia recounted her story with growing confidence. The shock of Harrison's bequest, Tony's immediate threats, the escalating violence that had torn her life apart. But as she spoke, she realized something had changed in the telling. She was no longer the frightened hospital orderly who'd stumbled into a billionaire's inheritance. She was a woman who'd fought for her family, who'd refused to be intimidated by wealth and power, who'd found love and strength in the most impossible circumstances. "And what would you say to those who suggest you orchestrated this entire situation for financial gain?" the defense attorney asked during cross-examination. Mia looked directly at Tony, seeing him clearly for the first time, without the haze of fear that had clouded her judgment for months. "I would say that some things are worth more than money: my daughter's safety, my integrity, the chance to honor a good man's final wishes. If I'd wanted to get rich quickly, there were much easier ways than being shot at by hired killers." The courtroom erupted in quiet laughter, and even the judge smiled. Tony's attorney had no response. When the judge finally called for recess, Mia found herself face to face with Jackson in the courthouse hallway. For a moment, they just stood looking at each other, 3 weeks of separation and uncertainty hanging between them. "Hi," he said softly. "Hi yourself." Her voice was barely a whisper. Then Layla was between them, launching herself into Jackson's arms with the enthusiasm of a child who'd missed someone desperately. "Jackson, Mom said you were helping the police catch the bad guys, but I missed you so much." He held her tightly, his eyes closing with emotion. "I missed you too, sweetheart. More than you know." "Are you coming home with us when this is over?" Layla asked with characteristic directness. Jackson's eyes found Mia's over her daughter's head. "That depends on your mom." "Of course he is," Layla said with 9-year-old certainty. "We're a family now." The simple declaration made Mia's eyes fill with tears. "Layla, why don't you go sit with Amelia for a minute?" "Jackson and I need to talk." When they were alone in a quiet alcove, the weight of everything unsaid pressed down on them. "I was so scared," Mia admitted, "when they took you away, when I didn't know if you'd be charged, if I'd ever see you again. I made you a promise," he said quietly, "that you wouldn't face any of this alone. I'm sorry I had to break that promise, even temporarily. You didn't break it. You kept it in the way that mattered most. You protected us." They stood close enough to touch, but not quite touching, both afraid to assume too much after 3 weeks of forced separation. "Mia," he began, "I need you to know that whatever happens with the charges, whatever the federal prosecutors decide—" "They're not filing charges," she interrupted. "Amelia told me this morning. Your cooperation with the investigation, the evidence you provided, the fact that you surrendered voluntarily, they're recommending you for a civilian commendation, not prosecution." The relief that crossed his features was profound. "So we're really free?" "We're really free." This time, when he reached for her, she didn't hesitate. His arms came around her with desperate relief, and she buried her face against his chest, breathing in the familiar scent of cedar and safety. "I love you," he murmured against her hair. "These 3 weeks without you and Layla, it wasn't living. It was just surviving." "I love you too. We both do." They were interrupted by Amelia's approach, her expression bright with news. The jury's reached a verdict. They're reconvening in 10 minutes. Back in the courtroom, the atmosphere was electric with anticipation. Tony sat rigid at the defendant's table, his expensive lawyers flanking him like an honor guard at a funeral. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" the judge asked. "We have, Your Honor. On the charge of embezzlement in the first degree, how do you find guilty?" The word echoed through the courtroom like a gunshot, but the jury wasn't finished. "On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder, how do you find guilty? On the charge of racketeering, how do you find guilty?" The litany continued for 27 separate charges, each guilty verdict hitting Tony like a physical blow. By the time the jury finished, he was slumped in his chair, the weight of his crimes finally catching up with him. "Sentencing will be scheduled for next month," the judge announced. "But given the severity and scope of these crimes, the court is prepared to recommend life imprisonment without the possibility of parole." As Tony was led away in handcuffs, he turned to look at Mia one final time. The hatred in his eyes was undiminished, but it no longer had the power to frighten her. He was finished, and they were free. Outside the courthouse, reporters clamored for statements, but Mia found herself overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had just happened. After months of living in fear, of running from safe house to safe house, it was finally over. "How does it feel to officially inherit $2 billion? One reporter called out. Mia looked at Jackson, who was holding Layla's hand, both of them smiling at her with love and pride. The inheritance that had nearly destroyed her life had ultimately given her everything she'd ever wanted. "It feels like the beginning," she said simply. 6 months later, Mia stood in the kitchen of their new home. Not the mansion that technically belonged to her, but a comfortable house in the suburbs where Layla could have a normal childhood and Jackson could build the security consulting firm they'd planned together. The inheritance had been officially transferred, making her one of the wealthiest women in the state. But more importantly, it had given her the resources to start the charitable foundation Harrison had always dreamed of, providing health care and education to families like the one she'd once been. "Pancakes are ready," Layla called from the dining room, where she was setting the table with the careful precision Jackson had taught her. "Coming, sweetheart," Mia called back, then turned to find Jackson watching her from the doorway, with an expression that still made her pulse quicken. "What?" she asked, smiling at the look on his face. "Just thinking about how lucky I am," he said, crossing to wrap his arms around her from behind. "A year ago, I was a man with no family, no real purpose beyond the next job. Now I wake up every morning knowing exactly what I'm fighting for." As they joined Layla for breakfast, Mia reflected on the journey that had brought them here. The inheritance that had seemed like a curse had ultimately been the greatest blessing of her life, not because of the money, but because of the man and the family it had helped her find. "Mom," Layla said around a mouthful of pancakes, "when you and Jackson get married, will I get to be the maid of honor?" Mia nearly choked on her coffee. "Layla!" "What?" "You two are obviously going to get married. You look at each other all googly-eyed, and Jackson keeps looking at that little box he thinks he hid in his sock drawer." Jackson's face turned red, and Mia turned to stare at him. "What little box?" "I was waiting for the right moment," he said sheepishly. "This is the right moment," Layla announced with authority. "Hurry up and ask her before the pancakes get cold." Jackson looked between Mia and her daughter, then started laughing. "Well, I guess my romantic proposal plans just got hijacked by a 9-year-old. "The best plans usually do," Mia said softly. He stood and disappeared briefly, returning with a small velvet box that he placed on the table between them. "Mia Sullivan, I love you and your incredible daughter. I love the life we've built together and the future we're planning. Will you marry me?" The ring was perfect, elegant but not ostentatious, beautiful but practical, just like the man offering it to her. "Yes," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, absolutely yes. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Layla cheered and clapped, and Mia realized that this was what Harrison Castillo had really given her. Not just money or security, but the chance to discover her own worth, the courage to fight for what mattered, the strength to trust in love even when everything seemed impossible. "So," Jackson said as they celebrated over rapidly cooling pancakes, "what do you think about a Christmas wedding?" "I think," Mia said, looking at her small, perfect family, "that sounds absolutely perfect." Outside, the world continued its complicated dance of wealth and power, but inside their kitchen, three people who'd found each other against impossible odds planned a future built on love instead of fear, hope instead of desperation. Harrison Castillo had been right about Mia's worth, but it had taken falling in love with a bodyguard and fighting for her daughter's safety to help her see it herself. The inheritance had made her rich, but love had made her whole. And as wedding plans and Christmas preparations began to fill their conversations, Mia knew that the best parts of her story were still being written. Not by billionaires or lawyers or federal judges, but by a little girl who'd always believed her mom deserved happiness, and a man who'd proven that sometimes the best protection comes from someone willing to love you exactly as you are. The fairy tale was real, but it wasn't about money or mansions or happily ever after. It was about ordinary people choosing to be extraordinary for each other, one pancake breakfast at a time. Have you ever had someone see your true worth when you couldn't see it yourself? What would you risk everything to protect? How do you know when someone is worth fighting for? Drop your thoughts below about Mia and Jackson's incredible journey from strangers to soulmates. Like this video if you believe true love can overcome any obstacle, and make sure you're subscribed for more stories about finding love in the most impossible circumstances. Check out tomorrow's episode. You won't want to miss it.